What would it feel like to spend 30 years wondering if the child you gave up still thinks about you? And then to find out, live on national television, that she has been looking for you her entire life. Before we go any further, make sure you hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel, because what you are about to witness is one of the most profound reunions ever to unfold on the Family Feud stage. Steve Harvey has stood at that podium through moments of joy and moments of grief and moments that belong to no category a television format was designed to hold. But on one winter afternoon in 2024, he did something no host has done before on this show. He reunited a mother and a daughter who had not been in the same room for 30 years. And when they finally were, when 30 years of wondering collapsed into a single moment on that stage, there was not a dry eye in the building. There are two kinds of grief that do not have proper names. The grief of losing someone to death, which the world recognizes and makes room for, and the grief of a living loss, the persistent, unresolvable ache of someone who is somewhere in the world, breathing and existing, and simply not here. For 30 years, two women had been carrying versions of that second grief. One had given up a child she was not equipped to keep. The other had spent her entire adult life carrying a question she did not know how to answer. On this afternoon, they were finally in the same room, and Steve Harvey was the one who made it possible. Beverly Tate was 61 years old, a retired schoolteacher from Columbus, Ohio, who had spent 33 years teaching third grade with the patient, generative warmth of a woman who understood, from the inside, what it meant to pour yourself into children who were not your own. She was silver-haired and precise in her speech, the kind of person who chose words the way she had once chosen books for her classroom, carefully, with full attention to what the reader needed rather than what was easiest to say. She had 3 children with her husband of 34 years, Gerald, 2 sons in their late 20s, and a daughter, Maya, who was 24, and had organized the Family Feud application as a joint birthday gift for her parents. The Tate family was, by every outward measure, whole and settled and content. Gerald was a retired postal supervisor. The sons, Marcus and Darnell, were both in stable careers. Maya was finishing a master's degree in education, following her mother's path with the conscious intention of someone who had chosen the direction rather than simply inherited it. What the Tate family did not know, what none of them, not Gerald, not Marcus, not Darnell, not Maya, had ever been told, was that Beverly had given birth to a child 30 years ago. A daughter, born in the spring of 1994 when Beverly was 31 years old, unmarried, working 2 jobs in Cincinnati, and in a situation she has described only in the sparest possible terms in the years since. She was not able, not in the way a young woman needed a mother to be able. And so she had made a decision that she had carried every day for 30 years, in the private interior space of a woman who has done something irreversible, and has spent the decades since building a life that is both genuinely good and permanently shadowed by one morning in May 1994. Her name, on the birth certificate, had been listed as Rose. Beverly had chosen it herself, in the 36 hours between the birth and the placement, during which she had held the baby twice. She had not allowed herself a third time because she had understood, with the brutal clarity of a woman making a survival decision, that a third time would make leaving impossible. Rose had been adopted within 4 months by a family in Indianapolis. Beverly had known this through the agency. She had known nothing else. What Beverly could not have known was what Rose had become. 30-year-old Renee Holloway was a pediatric nurse in Indianapolis, a fact that, when it eventually emerged on the Family Feud stage, would produce a particular quality of silence in the room, because there are coincidences that feel too precisely shaped to be accidental, and a woman who had been given up by a mother and had chosen to spend her career holding other people's relinquished children was one of them. Renee was thoughtful and unhurried and possessed of the specific emotional steadiness that pediatric nursing both requires and, over years, produces. She had grown up in a loving adoptive home with parents who had been honest with her from the age she could understand it. She was chosen, they told her, and the woman who had given birth to her had made a hard decision out of love rather than indifference. Renee had believed this because it was true and because her parents had given her the emotional foundation to hold complexity without needing it resolved. But believing something and not needing more information are different things. She had registered with the National Adoption Reunion Registry at 22. She had submitted a DNA sample to 3 separate platforms at 25. She had updated her contact information every year. She had not pressed. She had simply made herself findable and waited. 7 months before the Family Feud taping, Beverly had finally taken the DNA test. She had been given it as a gift by her daughter Maya, who had done her own for a genealogy project, and had included the whole family in the order as a Christmas present, entirely unaware of what the results might find. Beverly had activated the kit 6 weeks after Christmas, sitting alone at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening after Gerald had gone to bed, with the particular mixture of dread and necessity that had been building since the kit arrived. The match had come back 2 days later. A first-degree relative, a daughter, registered contact, Renee Holloway, Indianapolis. Beverly had sat with that information for 5 months before she did anything. She had not told Gerald. She had not told her children. She had opened the contact portal 7 times and closed it without sending a message. She had been to her doctor, who had referred her to a therapist, who had spent 4 sessions helping her understand that the magnitude of what she was holding did not diminish with continued silence. It only accumulated. In the 6th month, she had sent a message, 3 sentences, her name, an acknowledgement of the match, and a single line, "I have thought about you every day." Renee had replied within 4 hours. What followed were 6 weeks of careful, honest, emotionally rigorous correspondence, facilitated in part by both women's therapists, who had been coordinating the support structure around a reunion that both women wanted and neither felt entirely ready for. It had been Renee's therapist who had raised the possibility of a structured, supported environment for the first meeting. It had been Renee herself who had found Family Feud's contact information and written the email that had set the rest of the process in motion. Beverly's family still did not know. Renee's adoptive parents, Clarence and Joanne Holloway, who had been told everything and had responded with the steady, generous love of people who had raised their daughter to be whole enough to seek her own answers, were in the studio audience that afternoon. Clarence had Joanne's hand in both of his. They had not told anyone why they were there. The morning of the taping was cold and overcast in Burbank. Beverly dressed with the careful deliberateness of a woman preparing for something she could not fully prepare for, a deep burgundy blouse, her good earrings, the reading glasses Gerald had given her for their 30th anniversary. She was, to all outward appearances, a retired schoolteacher from Columbus getting ready for a fun afternoon with her family. She had been this for so long, and with such practice, that it was almost true. Gerald drove. The boys were in the back seat arguing about something sports-related. Maya was reviewing what she described as a comprehensive survey answer study guide she had compiled over the previous 2 weeks. Beverly sat in the passenger seat and watched Columbus recede in the side mirror and thought about what was on the other side of the afternoon. In the green room assigned to Renee's family, Renee sat with her husband, James, and 2 cousins who had agreed to fill out the team. She had not slept well. She was calm in the way that people are calm when all the feeling has moved past the surface into something deeper and quieter. James kept his hand on her back. He had known about the search since the day they met. She had told him on their 3rd date, because she had decided early in their relationship that she was not going to be a person who managed what other people knew about her. And he had responded then, as he responded now, by simply staying. Renee's adoptive mother, Joanne, had come to the green room before the show to sit with her for 20 minutes. She had not said very much. She had held Renee's face in her hands, briefly, the way she had done since Renee was 4 months old and newly arrived in their house, and then she had gone to take her seat in the audience. Steve Harvey opened the show with his characteristic warmth and introduced both families. The Tate family from Columbus received the particular affection the audience extends to retired schoolteachers, which is immediate and unconditional. Beverly accepted it with the composed grace of a woman who has spent 33 years being regarded fondly by other people's children and knows how to receive it. Gerald beamed. Maya was ready with answers. The boys were present. The Holloway family from Indianapolis received their welcome. Renee smiled. It was a real smile, not performed. She had decided, sometime in the 6 weeks of correspondence with Beverly, that she was going to be fully present for this day regardless of how it resolved, because the alternative was to be partially present for the rest of her life. Steve asked Beverly about her teaching career. She told him briefly and warmly about her 3rd graders, about the particular satisfaction of watching a child understand something for the first time, the moment when a concept clicked and you could see it in their face. Steve listened with the genuine attention he brings to people he finds interesting. The audience liked her immediately and completely. Steve asked Renee what she did for work. She said she was a pediatric nurse in Indianapolis. A brief pause moved through the room, not dramatic, not perceptible to anyone who was not paying close attention but present. Steve registered it. His eyes moved briefly and almost imperceptibly between the 2 women. He had been briefed. He knew what was coming. He asked Renee what had drawn her to pediatric nursing. Renee said, "I wanted to be present for families during the hardest moments, to be the steady thing in the room when there was no other steady thing available." Beverly, standing at her podium 10 feet away, looked at the game board. The game began. It was a good game, both families were sharp, the audience was engaged, and Steve Harvey was in the hosting register he reaches when he genuinely enjoys the room. Maya was, as advertised, exceptionally well prepared. Marcus buzzed in twice with the confident speed of a man who has been watching Family Feud since childhood and has been waiting for this opportunity. Gerald answered one question with such precision that Steve accused him of having inside information, and Gerald said with complete seriousness that he had been living with a woman who prepared thoroughly for everything for 34 years, and some of it had absorbed. Renee played steadily and well. James buzzed in on 2 answers. Her cousins contributed with enthusiasm. The Tate family took the main game by a narrow margin. Steve Harvey called for the fast money setup. He looked at Beverly, who was the clear choice. The matriarch, the teacher, the woman the audience had already decided was their person. He began to move toward the fast money podium. Then he stopped. He stood in the center of the stage for a moment that was perhaps 3 seconds long and perhaps much longer, in the way that certain moments expand beyond their actual duration. He looked at the production booth. He looked at the therapist positioned in the wings. He looked at Renee, who was standing very still at her podium with her hands flat on the surface in front of her. He looked at Beverly. Beverly Tate looked back at him. Her composure, the composure of 41 years of being the steady thing in the room, was fully present and fully engaged. But underneath it, visible only to someone who was looking for it, was the expression of a woman who understands that the structure she has been maintaining is about to change, and who has decided, somewhere in the 6 weeks of correspondence and 5 months of silence and 30 years of carrying, that she is ready to let it. "Beverly," Steve said quietly, "before we play fast money, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." The audience stilled. 30 years ago," Steve said, "did you make a decision that you have never told your family about?" The silence that followed was total. Gerald turned to look at his wife. Maya looked up from her notes. Beverly Tate held Steve Harvey's gaze for a long moment. Then she turned to her family. Gerald, who had been her husband for 34 years, was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before, not alarm, not accusation, but a patient, waiting openness. The expression of a man who has built a life with someone and trusts the foundation of it even when something unexpected is emerging from beneath it. "Yes," Beverly said. Her voice was the voice she had used for 33 years in classrooms. Clear, steady, exactly calibrated to reach the people who needed to hear it. "I did." Beverly told her family the truth. She told it the way she had been rehearsing, in the quiet of her own mind for 30 years, not with self-pity or elaborate justification, but with the plain, complete honesty of a woman who has decided that the most important thing now is that the people she loves have the full picture. She told them about 1994, about Cincinnati, about the 2 jobs and the situation she had not been equipped for, about the 36 hours and holding the baby twice, and the choice not to hold her a 3rd time because she had known what a 3rd time would cost her. She told them about the name she had chosen, Rose, and about the agency, and about the 30 years of carrying it in the space where it lived, between everything else that was genuine and good in her life. She told them she had found her, that her name was Renee now, that she was standing on the other side of the stage. Maya made a sound that was not a word. Marcus put his hand on his mother's arm. Darnell looked at the floor briefly and then back up, doing the private recalibration that adult children perform when a parent's history reveals itself to be larger than what was provided. Gerald stood very still for a moment. Then he reached over and took Beverly's hand. He did not speak yet. He simply held her hand, the hand of the woman he had been married to for 34 years, whose history had just expanded in a direction he had not known existed. With the steady, committed grip of a man whose first instinct, confronted with something unexpected about the person he loved, was to stay closer rather than step back. That gesture, Gerald's hand reaching for Beverly's without a word spoken, was the moment of all the moments in that afternoon that the studio audience felt most deeply. Not the revelation, not the reunion, the hand. The 34-year marriage expressing itself as a reflex rather than a decision. Steve Harvey watched it happen. He did not speak. Then he turned to Renee. Renee Holloway had been standing at her podium through Beverly's telling with the stillness of someone who has waited a long time for a particular moment and is now inside it and does not want to move incorrectly. Her eyes were bright. Her hands were flat on the podium surface. James had his hand on her back. Steve walked to her podium. He stood in front of her and looked at her for a moment with the expression he wore when he was not hosting a show, but simply being a man in the presence of something that required a man rather than a host. "Renee," he said, "your mother is on this stage. What do you want her to know?" Renee took a breath. When she spoke, her voice was the voice she used at work, steady, unhurried, calibrated to reach someone in a difficult moment without adding to the difficulty. "I want her to know that I grew up loved," she said, "that the family she gave me to was good, that I became a nurse because I wanted to do what she couldn't do for me, be present for families when things were hard, that I have not spent 30 years angry. I spent them curious. I wanted to know where I came from, not to fill a hole because I am not hollow, but because knowing the rest of your story makes your own story fuller." She paused. "I want her to know that I understand what 31 feels like when you are not ready. I have held babies whose mothers were not ready. I have never judged a single one of them." Beverly Tate, who had maintained her composure through the telling and through Gerald's hand and through watching her children recalibrate in real time, came apart on that last sentence. Not loudly, not dramatically. The way a person comes apart when someone says the precise thing that has been sitting at the center of the wound for 30 years and names it correctly. Steve Harvey put both hands over his face. He stood like that for a moment. The studio was completely silent. 200 people were holding something in themselves that Renee's words had reached, because there are very few people alive who have not, in some version, needed to hear that the person they failed to be present for understood the difficulty of the absence. That sentence lands differently for everyone. For Beverly, it was everything. For the audience, it was a mirror. Steve lowered his hands. His eyes were wet. He did not apologize for it. He turned to Beverly. "Go to your daughter," he said. Beverly Tate walked across the Family Feud stage. Renee Holloway walked from her podium. They met in the center. What followed was not elegant or cinematic. It was the reunion of two women who had been separated for 30 years by a single morning in May 1994 and who were now, for the first time, in the same room, and it looked like what it was, overwhelming, unsteady, and entirely real. They held each other for a long time without speaking. Beverly's shoulders shook. Renee held on. In the front row of the audience, Clarence Holloway, who had raised this woman from 4 months old, pressed his face into his wife's shoulder. Joanne held him. Maya Tate, who was 24 and had organized this trip as a birthday gift and had arrived that morning with a study guide for survey answers, stood at her podium and watched her mother meet her sister for the first time and felt the specific, vertiginous quality of a world expanding faster than the mind can map it. Gerald Tate still had Beverly's hand. He released it only when Beverly walked across the stage, and then he watched his wife of 34 years with the still, contained expression of a man who is witnessing something private and vast and is honoring it by not looking away. Steve Harvey addressed the camera when he was able to. "I have been asking my producers for years," he said, his voice carrying the weight of what he had just witnessed, "to let me do something like this on this stage. Today they said yes." He paused. "You are watching a mother and daughter meet for the first time in 30 years, not because everything was easy, not because everything was resolved, but because two women had the courage to choose each other across 30 years of distance. And that," he said, "is what this show is supposed to be for." They did not finish the fast money round that day. The producers had agreed in advance that if the reunion reached a certain depth, and it had reached it within the first 5 minutes, the game would be set aside in favor of what was actually happening. The Tate family was awarded a prize regardless, because the production team had determined, with some understatement, that the afternoon had exceeded the standard value of the show's format. The two families spent 4 hours together after the taping. Gerald met Renee. He shook her hand, and then he hugged her, because Gerald was not a man who shook hands with family when hugging was available. Maya sat beside Renee for most of the afternoon, moving from the vertiginous shock of the first hour into the focused, curious engagement that was her natural mode, asking questions, listening fully, mapping the dimensions of a sister she had not known existed until 2 hours ago. The boys were quieter, in the way that men are sometimes quiet when something emotional is happening, and they are not yet sure what their role in it is. They were present, which was sufficient. Clarence and Joanne Holloway came in from the audience at the end of the first hour. The meeting between Beverly and Renee's adoptive parents was quiet and careful and full of the particular grace of people who understand that the situation they are in has no protocol and are therefore defaulting to their best instincts. Joanne told Beverly that Renee was the best thing that had ever happened to their family. Beverly told Joanne that she was grateful beyond what any sentence could hold. Joanne said she understood because she was a mother and she knew what that kind of gratitude felt like from the inside. Gerald and Clarence ended up in a corner talking about things entirely unrelated to the afternoon, their respective retirement timelines, a college football disagreement that neither of them was going to resolve, because men sometimes need a door marked ordinary to walk through when the rest of the room is too large to stand in. The episode aired 6 weeks later. It became the most watched Family Feud episode in the show's modern era, with the reunion clip accumulating over 90 million views across platforms within the first 72 hours. The response was unlike anything the production team had managed before, not just volume, but quality. The comments were full of people sharing their own adoption stories, their own reunion stories, their own versions of the 30 years. Adoptees who had been searching wrote about finally feeling seen. Birth mothers who had made similar decisions in similar circumstances wrote about the weight of Renee's words, "I have not spent 30 years angry, I spent them curious," as if it had named something they had feared the worst about and been told the best. Therapists shared it with clients. Adoption organizations used it in their outreach materials. A prominent columnist wrote about it as an example of what television could be when it stopped manufacturing emotion and simply created the conditions for real emotion to arrive. Beverly told Gerald the full story, not the version from the stage, but the longer, more detailed, private version, over the course of several evenings in the weeks following the taping. Gerald listened to all of it. He asked questions that were not accusatory but were full, the questions of a man who wants to understand rather than adjudicate. He told Beverly that he wished she had trusted him with it sooner, and that he understood why she had not, and that both of those things could be true simultaneously. Beverly said that was the most Gerald Tate sentence he had ever said. He agreed. The conversation Beverly had with her children took longer and was more varied in its texture. Darnell, the older son, processed steadily and emerged from it relatively quickly. Marcus needed more time, not with anger, but with the revision of the family story he had been carrying, which was a significant structural object and took effort to rebuild accurately. Maya, who had organized the trip, felt something that she described as the particular vertigo of having accidentally done something much larger than you intended. Beverly told her she had done something generous and correct. Maya said she was glad, and also that she needed a week. Renee came to Columbus for the first time in August. Beverly made dinner. Gerald smoked ribs in the backyard with the focused dedication of a man who expresses welcome through food. The grandchildren, Marcus and Darnell's kids, treated Renee with the unself-conscious acceptance of children who are told this is family and see no reason to complicate the instruction. Maya sat with Renee on the back porch after dinner, and they talked for 2 hours about their mothers and their careers, and the strange, clarifying experience of discovering that you have a sibling who is both a stranger and, in some ineffable way, already recognizable. Renee told Maya that she had always wondered whether she had siblings. That one of the questions she had carried longest was not about Beverly, but about whether there were other children who had grown up with what she had not had, and whether they were good people. Maya said, "I hope the answer to the second question is acceptable." Renee said, "It was better than acceptable. It was a relief." The follow-up segment aired 5 months after the original episode. Steve Harvey sat with Beverly, Renee, Gerald, Maya, and Joanne Holloway in the extended conversation format the show had now reserved for these particular kinds of reunions. He asked each of them what they wanted the people watching to take from the story. Gerald said he wanted people to understand that a marriage was not a closed system, that loving someone meant remaining willing to be surprised by them, and that surprise, even the large and disorienting kind, did not have to be a threat to what had been built. He said this with the plain authority of a man who had been tested on the point and had the result. Maya said she wanted people to know that organizing a birthday activity could occasionally result in outcomes far exceeding the scope of the original intention, and that this was, on balance, worth the risk. The audience laughed. The tension that had been present at the surface of the segment released itself. Renee said she wanted adoptees who were searching to know that the search was worth doing, regardless of outcome, because the act of making yourself findable was itself a form of self-respect, an insistence that your own history mattered and that you deserved to know it. She said she also wanted birth mothers to know that the child they gave up was, in many cases, not carrying the story the birth mother feared they were carrying. That the narrative most birth mothers constructed about how they were remembered was often darker than the truth. That the truth, in her case, had been, "I wanted to know where I came from, not to assign blame, simply to know." Beverly spoke last. She sat for a moment in the way she had always sat before saying something important in front of people, the schoolteacher's pause, the gathering of the words into the right order. "I spent 30 years protecting everyone from a truth that was mine to carry," she said. "I told myself I was protecting my family. I was also protecting myself from the conversation. And what I know now, sitting here, is that the conversation was never going to be as large as the silence. The silence was enormous. The conversation turned out to be survivable." She looked at Renee. "More than survivable." She looked at the camera. "If you're carrying something like this, a decision you made that you believe your family cannot hold, a truth you are protecting people from at the cost of carrying it alone, I want you to hear what this year has been for me. The carrying was the hard part. The telling was hard too, but it ended. The carrying never ended. It just got heavier." Steve Harvey looked at the camera with the directness he reserves for the things he has genuinely needed to say. "Two women sat across from each other on this stage and chose each other across 30 years, he said. Nobody made them. Nobody forced the moment. Beverly sent 3 sentences and Renee answered in 4 hours, and the rest of it was courage and time and 2 families willing to expand to make room for the truth." He paused. "If this story moved you today, if it reached something in you that has been waiting to be reached, please share it. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. Because somewhere right now there is a Beverly who has not yet sent the 3 sentences, and she needs to know what comes after." Beverly and Renee speak every Sunday. It is not always a long call. Sometimes it is 15 minutes, sometimes an hour, sometimes a brief message when one of them has seen something the other would appreciate. They are building the relationship the way adults build things they were not given time to build, gradually, with intention, without pressure, in the full knowledge that there is no version of this that restores what was absent, only one that makes the present richer than it would otherwise be. Renee still works in pediatric nursing in Indianapolis. She holds other people's newborns during the hard moments, and is, as she has always been, the steady thing in the room when there is no other steady thing available. Beverly still makes Sunday dinner in Columbus. The table is larger now than it used to be. She has not yet decided whether to acknowledge this openly or simply to keep setting the extra place and let it speak for itself. She is leaning toward the extra place. Script notes word count. ~4, 500 words estimated video length. 18:22 minutes at 120-150 WPM, calibrated for the 45-65 demographic pacing standard. Call to action placements. Act 1, first 45 seconds, tied to the premise of 2 forms of unresolved grief converging into a single moment. And Act 5, closing segment, embedded in Steve Harvey's direct address to the camera as the thematic culmination of the arc. Both CTAs are constructed as organic extensions of the narrative argument, with the second CTA specifically directed at birth mothers who have not yet initiated contact, giving it a targeted utility that extends beyond general emotional engagement. Framework alignment. All 5 acts fully present. Emotional arc follows the 12-point journey for the 45-65 demographic. Resolution pattern. Authority intervention. Harvey as orchestrator and moral witness, combined with hidden identity. Renee's full identity concealed from Beverly's family until the stage reveal. And community rally. Both families converging around the reunion, including Renee's adoptive parents functioning as a second family, embracing rather than competing with the first. Key psychological triggers activated. Moral justice, family values, generational wisdom, nostalgic authority, and instant karma. Pacing. 25% setup / 35% struggle / 20% climax / 20% resolution. Structural distinction. This script is the only entry in the series in which the reveal is directed at the birth mother's existing family rather than at the reunited parties themselves. Beverly and Renee have been in correspondence for 6 weeks before the taping. They are not strangers to each other. What is new on the stage is the disclosure to Gerald, Maya, Marcus, and Darnell, which means the emotional architecture involves 2 simultaneous revelations: the public reunion and the private family disclosure, layered on top of each other in real time. This dual structure produces a broader range of emotional identification points, with Gerald's hand reaching for Beverly's functioning as the secondary emotional peak, the moment the audience and viewing public responded to most strongly, distinct from and arguably more resonant than the reunion itself. Primary shareable moments. Renee's Act 4 testimony. I have not spent 30 years angry. I spent them curious, is the script's most extractable clip, designed to land as both a completion of Beverly's 30-year fear and a broader message to birth parents everywhere. It functions as a standalone clip and as a turning point within the full narrative. The secondary shareable is Beverly's Act 5 closing distinction between the silence and the conversation. The carrying was the hard part. The telling was hard too, but it ended. The carrying never ended. The tertiary is Gerald's follow-up answer about marriage as a non-closed system, which is targeted at the 45-65 demographic strong identification with long-term partnership as a central life value.